So now it's being recorded. Shall we wait a couple more minutes? We have now approximately 30 people already joining in the loop. We were supposed to be around 45, but I think this is fine. So if you agree, we can start. What do you think?
Punctual as Germans are, Sebastian, so that is fine to start, I think.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, thank you so much, everybody, for joining this, in my opinion, highly interesting and very relevant topic today, because very often we are just talking about how to make change, how to communicate change. Today we actually talk about how to listen to employees, how to listen to your organization, and how this listening and why it is so important to respond to the employee experience and what you feel around it. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining, and also thank you very much, Charlotte, to join us here from Culture Amp in UK, and for Friederike Rissing to join us from Heidelberg. Thank you so much for having the two of you here. Very honored, also respective to your past experience. Okay, then let's go a little bit into the topic. So all of us recently had to deal with quite a significant crisis, and I'm very curious also, we have some polls data to see who actually collected feedback, who actually listened to the organization. And today we will go through several topics. First of all, we will analyze why gathering employee feedback during times of change is so important, and why you always should be putting culture first when it comes to your organization. And when you put this focus on your culture and your people, we will also analyze what will be the impact, the long-term impact on your organization. So it's not only the employee experience, it also results in the business output. And in the third part, we will also analyze on what is the best approach in gathering that feedback, and how you should communicate to your organization, how you should get the input from the organization. And finally, also very, very important aspect, we will hear how this is working in real life, and how feedback can be used in the day-to-day life in order to improve the leadership, and how to guide an organization throughout difficult times, especially now that we have the COVID situation. But it can be applied to any types of change. It can be applied to a simple movement in auspices. It can be applied to a reshaping of strategy, a restructuring. So it is not only the COVID period of time, it can be used for any moment and any point of change in your organizations. So thank you, Charlotte, so much for being here with us today. We are really excited about your professional input and sharing how feedback can be used in times of change. Thank you so much. I will hand over to you.
Great, thank you. So hello everyone, so great to have you all here today. So before we get into today's session, I first just wanted to briefly introduce myself. So I'm Charlotte Burt, I'm a senior people scientist at Culture Amp, based out of our London office. So my background is in occupational psychology, and I've worked for a number of years now in the world of research and employee experience. Now I get to work at Culture Amp and really help some of the world's best companies make the world of work even better. For those that don't know or aren't familiar with Culture Amp, we're a people and culture platform. So we started back in 2011 in Melbourne, Australia. And really the company was established because we believe that putting culture first is beneficial not only for employees and individuals, but also for the organisations that they serve. And our research has found that companies who do truly put their culture first really do reap the rewards in terms of long-term business success. So just to get us started, I'd like to do just a very quick poll and find out the extent to which your organisation usually collects employee feedback. So whether that's engagement surveys, it could be onboarding, exit surveys, anything around kind of wellbeing and inclusion. So you should hopefully see a poll pop up now. And if you just let us know, do you usually collect some form of employee feedback? I'll just give you a few seconds to answer that. Hopefully we should see the results in a moment.
Yes, okay. I think now we can end poll, share results.
Great, so really good to see. So almost 80% of you are collecting some kind of feedback from your employees on a kind of a regular basis. So now another question. So are you or your organisation currently collecting feedback from your employees about your organisational response to COVID-19? So again, you should see another poll pop up at the moment in a moment. Again, just submit your answer when you're ready.
So still voting. I think we can. Okay, we can end the poll. I will share results.
Okay, so we can see just over half of you have been collecting some form of feedback, but we can see how there's a really big difference between companies or organisations that usually collect feedback and those that perhaps haven't used this time and this kind of time of change that we're going through to seek feedback from employees. So it's in these really difficult times that companies are finding out what their culture really is. The way that people show up, from leaders to frontline employees, is very much based on the environment that you create for them. When employees look back on this period, they're going to remember the peaks and troughs and not every single experience that they had. Over the last couple of months, we at Culture Amp have seen floods of requests from organisations to help them navigate this unusually challenging situation. And really the guidance that we're providing is always the same. And that is, even when it feels difficult, and in fact, especially when it feels difficult, you should absolutely be focusing on the employee experience. So whilst plans are shifting and we know that stress is rising, and sometimes, simple operations can feel a bit more in flux, people are forced to adapt to challenging times. And it's in this type of situation where conflict, stress, and crisis often arise. You can let them overwhelm you, or you can actually lead the way and intentionally build upon the things that your culture stands for. To quote our own Culture Amp CEO, Didier Elzinger, if you don't deliver on your culture in a crisis, then your culture meant nothing to start with. And when you stand successful on the other side, your culture will be why. So if you are familiar with Culture Amp or have joined any of our kind of webinars in the past, you will likely have heard us use the term culture first. And that's because at Culture Amp, we really believe that culture is the foundation of all great brands and all truly successful businesses. And we should be using people data and putting culture first when making business decisions. And the companies that are already disrupting their industries today are the ones who are already putting their culture first. That being said, it's important to acknowledge that putting culture first when going through change can actually feel really difficult. Typically, when we think about surveying through change, we're referring to organisational change, such as office moves, restructures, mergers or acquisitions. And during changes such as this, we talk about it being the most crucial time to be gathering and acting on employee feedback and really putting culture first. However, as we all know, organisations around the world have been united in this kind of common thread at the moment that is really resulting in unprecedented levels of organisational change. That is, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic. And actually, if we're being really honest, I imagine many of you will feel that these moments shown on the screen here, including kind of COVID-19, aren't always the times when we think about putting culture first. And this may be because we just don't make the connection between something like a restructure and our culture, And at times it can just seem easier to focus on just getting the change done and implemented, and you kind of put culture to the side. And when we do think about the current situation, many businesses will feel that they are just trying to keep their heads above water, and again, aren't even thinking about culture at the moment. In fact, one of the most common reasons we hear when a company is deciding whether or not to gather employee feedback at a particular time is, we know that culture is important and we need to act on it, but we're going through a big change at the moment, so it's not the right time for us. So in other words, we know that employees are going through a change and things like engagement will likely take a dip, so we don't want to gather their feedback right now. But in reality, this is actually the most crucial time to be acting on employee feedback and putting culture first. Understanding the pain points during change and then acting on those in real time is crucial in being successful through these changes. And there are a few reasons why we see organisations reluctant to seek feedback during change. And this can be likened to the old proverb that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, which is speak no evil, hear no evil, see no evil. In other words, organisations become reluctant to ask or just become resigned to the situation. But if we do want to make the organisational response to change a success, then why would we be reluctant to hear feedback? It's interesting that organisations are often adept at the first aspect, so what they speak, and they also tend to be very adept at positioning their communications, or to speak no evil, as it were. However, there are things that, if we're honest, we can be less keen to hear, and certainly things that as leaders, HR directors, we are less keen to see. And having its roots in individual psychology, and we are often reluctant to face reality. Or on the other hand, we just become resigned to an outcome we feel that we cannot control or influence. And we therefore just become disinterested in actually digging into the issue further. So let's look at the first aspect of reluctance, or hear no evil. So reluctance in relation to gaining employee feedback during change or a crisis situation often centres around a wish to avoid declining engagement scores or general low sentiment. These people are usually correct that there will be lower results in more unstable conditions. And if they measure engagement, or if they haven't done things perfectly, you're likely to see a decline. However, without that baseline data during the transition or during the response to change, the business will be really unable to show improvement or to take any remedial action. Moreover, we should keep in mind that measuring employee engagement and gathering employee feedback more broadly is not about trying to score an A+ or 100%. It's about learning and it's about growth. And it's the kind of continuous improvement that Carol Dweck talks about in her philosophy around the growth mindset. So I also referred to resignation, which is, see no evil. And this could be perceived to stem from something more similar to learned helplessness. And learned helplessness is really a state where individuals believe they cannot control or influence a situation, and therefore they just give up on trying. And if we possess that belief that we can't influence how people feel about the change, then we may as well not find out how they feel, because we won't be able to act on that information. In the case of COVID, for example, unfortunately, there will be many, many things out of an organisation's control. But there does remain a number of things that we can still do to make our employees' lives better during this time. And no matter how small that action may be, it's still worth knowing about. So really the key thing to note here is that our organisational behaviour may be being influenced by the same kind of thinking errors that hijack our individual emotions, influencing our behaviour and willingness to seek out employee feedback. However, not asking for feedback and not taking action on it does not mean that the issue is not there. Another quote that we really like at Culture Amp is, culture is always there. It is a living, breathing concept which exists whether we pay attention to it or not. And if we continue with this line of thinking, then we can start to reframe some of our reluctance and resignation to gather feedback. For example, one of the questions we include in our engagement surveys and also our change template is, the leaders at my company demonstrate that people are important to the company's success. So if we look at that in another way, or from another perspective, we can see that the fact that you're actually asking employees how they feel and the nature of the questions that you ask can also yield significant strides in and of itself. And questions like that really start to show what you're striving for. Yet some of our customers, even those that have a really established and sophisticated and mature approach to requesting feedback, often call feedback processes to an abrupt halt in the face of change or crisis events. I mentioned earlier, but we've had countless conversations with customers in the last couple of months who are thinking of either pulling back their engagement surveys or just stopping gathering feedback from employees at the moment, just fearing it's the wrong time. And we do recognise that during times of high pressure or uncertainty, there is a tendency to cast aside best practice in favour of more pressing issues. However, collecting feedback from your teams during a crisis helps you inform your evolving strategy and also your business response. We'd also argue that casting aside employee feedback actually seems to run counterintuitive to the research and to our fundamental understanding of how best to manage change. So next, I'm going to talk about the principles of why you should in fact continue to gather feedback during times of change and uncertainty. So every textbook on leadership during change focuses on communication, and even more so during times of crisis. We need to be able to communicate clearly and absorb the fear from our teams so that they can drive towards a plan in the face of uncertainty. Yet a really crucial component of communication is listening, and this often gets overlooked. But how do you land a message when you don't actually know what matters to your employees? Organisations are often really aware that they need to communicate through change, but this should really be a two-way street. People can become disconnected or misunderstand what's going on if they're just being blasted with updates. And that's why gathering employee feedback is also really important, because it turns that communication into a loop. And when we think about the proper meaning of communication, it is two-way. It's about speaking, but it's also about listening. And many of us can be guilty during times of change of only focusing on the speaking portion of communication and actually neglecting the listening part of the equation. Again, to quote our CEO Didier, failing to close the loop in your communication by listening to employee feedback is highly likely to compromise the success of your change implementation programs. We do often see much time and effort put in the case for change, but far less is asked around how those who are impacted by the change actually feel about it. Whilst in the case of COVID-19, the changes weren't planned by the organisation, the impact felt by employees is still just as great, and therefore closing that feedback loop continues to be a really important aspect. So employee feedback will not only help your people cope with the change, but it can also drive the decisions you make in response to the change itself. So at Culture Amp, we really advocate gathering feedback pre-change to help understand readiness from employees. However, gathering feedback during the change or during a crisis can still be immensely valuable, and it can help organisations to better direct resources and understand where employees may need more support. And in some cases, you can even pivot and change your response. For example, asking whether employees feel supported during the COVID-19 pandemic or whether their well-being has been impacted from remote working means that actions can be taken there and then to address those things quickly, and specifically to the parts of the organisation and the employees that need it most. At Culture Amp, we have developed a set of COVID-19 specific surveys, including COVID response, remote wellbeing, and more recently, preparing to return to the workplace, to really help organisations gather data through this period of change and uncertainty. And we'll talk about those some more a little later. But this really just brings me on to my final point. And that's often leaders make assumptions about how people are feeling and what their response will be, when the reality can actually look really different. So gathering feedback allows you to understand what employees are actually hearing and not what you think you've told them or what you think they've heard. A trend that we often see when looking at employee feedback data in response to change are differences across management levels within the organisation. So often senior leadership respond most favourably across the board, and particularly when we look at questions such as, the leaders at my company keep people informed about what is happening. And when we start to discuss and unpack this, often the senior leadership team will feel that they've been thinking really carefully about the messaging around change and sharing this. But when you dig underneath it, what they are often communicating is just the business rationale and the corporate strategy, when those people on the ground receiving the message want to know what the impact will be on them and how it will feel. They really want to hear the story and not just an explanation of the business or the financial stats, for example. And I think this is even more true in change that happens extrinsic to the organisation, such as COVID-19. Employees really want to know what it will mean for them and how the organisation is pivoting to help them. But how can we know if communication is landing with the audience? Well, by asking them. If you survey through change, or any emergency for that matter, you can start to hear what employees are actually hearing rather than what we intended them to hear. You can also understand what they're feeling and what they're saying they need more of, and we can then start to respond accordingly. None of us really know what it's like for others in very different circumstances during this change. And as much as we try to put ourselves in others' shoes, the best way of knowing how our people interpret our messages is by asking them what they really heard. So we've talked about why it's important to gather employee feedback during times of change, but it's also really important to consider how the employee experience you're creating now is crucial to long-term business success. In truth, the employee experience is one of the most important business considerations during tough times. It's when an organisation's commitment to its employees is really laid bare. During a crisis, employees are especially key to issues such as which benefits get cut first, whether sacrifices are being fairly distributed between units and levels. And leaders may be focused on the business, but employees who could be let go or made redundant at any time don't have the luxury of putting the company first. And how they feel treated during a crisis can have far greater long-term effects. So firstly, company reputations are fragile. Employees keep track of how they are treated when the chips are down, and they share those notes with their social media networks. I'm sure over the last couple of months, we have all read or heard of horror stories from friends or family about poor treatment from companies during this crisis. And a company can go from angelic to draconian very quickly, and people are not afraid to share that information publicly. One story that actually sticks in my mind from recent weeks is of a CEO who laid off his staff via a video call while standing in front of his swimming pool. And this video was quickly shared on LinkedIn, and that company was then left trying to pick up the pieces. I think here, if employees are not treated well, organisations will find that their reputation doesn't recover as quickly as its bottom line. And really ignoring the employee experience now can haunt your Glassdoor ratings for years to come. Secondly, commitment can be easily lost. So as well as company reputations being fragile, when employees don't feel well treated during times of crisis or uncertainty, employee commitment can also be damaged. So broadly speaking, employees who are committed to their organisation generally feel a connection with their company, feel that they fit in, feel that they understand the goals of the organisation. And in return, committed employees tend to be more engaged, more productive, and more proactive in offering their support. However, when companies are struggling, leaders often focus on large-scale issues and external stakeholders. And as a result, they can tend to forget that employees care both about the organisation's financial health, but also about what it's like to work there. Employees are unlikely to work harder and be committed to an organisation when they hear about executives cutting jobs and salaries, but then still paying out bonuses. And when mass layoffs are happening everywhere, it can be tempting to think that all you need to do is help someone keep their job to make them feel happy and committed. However, the experience that you're creating today is not just about today. It's for 6 months from now, when your best people are figuring out what they want to do. And that takes me on to my third point, which is retaining top talent during a crisis is crucial. So when the dust from COVID-19 blows over, and of course it will, which companies do you think will have an easier time recruiting and keeping talent? And which organisations do you think will see a massive exodus the moment hiring gets back to normal? It's important to consider now what this crisis will reveal about the culture of your company, for your people, and critically your top talent. Even before COVID-19 hit, top talent could be scarce and in high demand. Even the likes of Google, Amazon, and Apple failed to hold on to their employees for long, with the median tenure just 2 years. However, COVID-19 marks an all-new era on the war for talent. The term war for talent was coined in 1997 by McKinsey and Company, who noticed that employers were increasingly struggling to attract and retain skilled workers as competition for talent got more and more fierce. And as the job market evolved and expanded, the most successful companies were constantly adapting their retention strategies to maintain appropriate talent levels. And in this moment of uncertainty and this moment of change, more than ever, it's crucial for organisations to demonstrate a culture of valuing employees and taking the steps required to retain quality staff. And that brings me on to my last point, which is ultimately focusing on the employee experience now can help you recover the recovery collapse later down the line. To quote the Microsoft president, Brad Smith, and these are the kinds of times that define the character of a company. People want to work for an employer that cares about the bottom line and the well-being of its employees. So whilst leaders may count on poor job markets to retain valued staff despite poor experiences, employees don't forget those experiences and they may just abandon ship at the first opportunity. And what this means is that when the situation does change and you're in a position to ride a new, lean, finely honed team of employees, you suddenly find them running for the doors. And that will give your competitors an opportunity to absorb more of that newly available market share whilst you sit trying to rebuild your teams. So companies that do want to stay one step ahead act now, prioritising the employee experience during the crisis and during the change, rather than planning on how you can make it up to employees further down the line. So how do we actually go about prioritising the employee experience and effectively go about gathering that data? Well, firstly, it's hard to effectively lead your people through a crisis without understanding as much as you can about what they're experiencing and what their needs are. If we do take the current COVID-19 situation as an example, the intricacies of how this impacts employees' personal lives goes far beyond what an organisation will ever be privy to. And whilst there will be things outside of an organisation's control, and for example, you can't change an employee's living situation, it should be a top priority to help them navigate the situation with the information, resources, tools, and flexibility that you are able to offer. And really conducting a survey is the fastest way to see where resources are effective and where you might need to lean in more. For example, which managers need more support or which teams are experiencing more challenges with remote working. And at a time like this, just listening and engaging in a conversation is a hugely important way to support your employees. And over the next few slides, I'm going to show you how a platform like Culture Amp can help you gather feedback during times of change. So in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the team of people scientists like myself at Culture Amp have created a set of templates which are available both to customers and non-customers of Culture Amp to enable organisations to gather feedback from employees during this specific period of change. So the first of these to launch was the COVID-19 response survey, which to date has already been utilised by over 250 organisations globally. And we know that unexpected emergencies often pose unprecedented and unique circumstances. However, there are substantial bodies of research that can help us determine what feedback is most crucial to collect, understand and act on during times of change and emergency. As such, much of the science behind our COVID response templates derives from the science behind Culture Amp's change survey templates. And change management models and research demonstrate that factors like company confidence, leadership, communication and enablement are crucial to act on during times of change, when ways of working, policies and employee roles and responsibilities are being updated regularly. And in fact, data collected from Culture Amp's COVID-19 response survey shows just how important strong leadership and effective communications are during times of change. So when we look at which questions most drive our desired outcome of company confidence in the organisation's response to COVID, the data tells us that leaders are highly important, with the 3 highest drivers in the top 5 pertaining to leadership's role. So specifically, whether leaders have made effective decisions, whether they have provided a sense of stability, and whether they have been appropriately visible and accessible during the pandemic. You'll also see the item, we are receiving timely communications, is also a key item in driving that overall company confidence in COVID response. And as the situation has continued to evolve, we are starting to see a shift away now from COVID-19 response feedback and a move towards well-being and preparing to return to the workplace. And next, we're just going to take a closer look at the Prepare for Returning to the Workplace survey and how organisations can use employee feedback to really shape their return to work strategy. So organisations that have switched a significant proportion of their employees to working remotely are now considering how to effectively transition their employees back to the workplace. In addition, COVID-19 has resulted in entirely new ways of working, and there is an appetite to understand what the new normal could look like. And for many organisations, this new normal reflects large-scale changes to their business model and traditional ways of working. So the Prepare for Returning to the Workplace survey can help you understand how your people are feeling, what concerns they might have about returning to the workplace, and help guide what an effective return plan might look like. So a survey such as this can help you answer the following questions. How safe do employees feel about returning to the workplace, and what safety measures could help alleviate their concerns? What is the appetite to continue working remotely, and do employees feel that this will be effective for them and their teams? And lastly, what new ways of working have been effective and that we can continue to utilise in the future? So if you're still unsure of the best way to gather feedback or how often you should do it, our recommendation is that there is no time like the present. In fact, now is an opportune time to understand how your employees are feeling, particularly with regards to returning to work. Just a couple of things to consider. So if you are still thinking about what to ask employees, consider just asking one open-ended question to start the dialogue. We'd suggest a question such as, what can the company do to support you as you make the transition back to the workplace? This will really allow employees to share what's most important to them, which may be different to what you thought they needed. So we've heard about the importance of gathering employee feedback during times of crisis and not neglecting the employee experience. So next, we're going to hear from Friederike and share her experience and how the leadership team and her company acted during times of crisis and what her recommendations are for the future.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. I will take over from here. Thank you so much for the great input and also for the scientific approach towards employee feedback and how this can be used, especially during times of change. But now I guess we are all super curious to hear also from Friederike Rissing, who is HR Director of DACH and NORDICS. That means the German-speaking area and the Nordic countries. She has a tremendous experience in HR talent management. So she has been talent director Europe and North America, including the Russia and CIS countries. And now she's, as I mentioned, the HR director for, I would say, one of the strongest regions in all Europe. And we also would like to hear a little bit about, because especially Reckitt Benckiser and fast-moving consumer goods is one of the most speedy, agile, and in my opinion also Reckitt Benckiser is one of the most entrepreneurial companies in this field, and it's for sure a great learning also from us. If you would be so kind to give us a short introduction about yourself and to maybe also introduce Reckitt Benckiser for the audience. Maybe not everybody heard about them.
Yes, very happy to. So thank you, Sebastian, for introducing myself quickly. So my name is, you can call me Rika. I know my name has a lot of I's, it's a very German name, so it's hard to remember. So I think Rika is just fine and is rememberable. So as Sebastian already said, I'm the HR director for DACH and NORDICS. So it's Germany, Austria, Switzerland, and the Nordic countries, Finland, Sweden, Denmark, you get the point. And I'm super passionate about, as an HR director, being able to create an environment of trust and fairness where people really can progress and learn and are inspired by their leaders also to perform and are rewarded by their leaders. So to impact that environment is kind of my passion, to really, create an awesome employee experience for our people. So that's why I also decided to join you guys today, and I would love to sit in a room with you and have a great conversation about these topics. I'm sure that would be awesome, and also learn from you guys what you have done so far. But today I will share a little bit about the experiences I gathered in the past years. But before I start, I'll give you a quick overview about what RB actually is, so that you get a little bit of a feel of what kind of company I'm coming from. So as Sebastian said, we are an FMCG company, so a consumer goods company which are creating products to protect, heal, and nurture. So basically, if you've probably heard it about great brands like Vanish and Finish and Durex and Sagrotan, Dettol, Lysol. So
Right.
maybe you have seen that in your stores, even though you do not really understood what kind of a company is behind that. So we're quite global. So we're operating out of almost 200 countries. We have 40,000 employees across the world, almost 30 billion NR yearly, and we are listed actually in the UK at the FTSE 20. We sell 25 million products daily, and we are quite international, dynamic. I always say we are the speedboat of FMCG, although we are quite traditional company. So we go long back, like 200 years back, actually founded in Germany and in the UK, and we merged in 2000. And we are quite also a diverse company, meaning that we have, for example, also very different generations working for us. And globally, they're 48% millennials. And locally, where I work, so in my region, we are even more than 60% millennials. I'm saying that because millennials, you know, some of us might be of a bit of a different generation like myself. So I grew up a little bit differently. I had different learning styles maybe. But for millennials, feedback is key, right? They're really asking for feedback to get from us, but they also want to make an impact. They also want to give feedback. So I think that fits quite well to the topic we have today.
Thank you so much, Rike. Rike, you mentioned your purpose is to create a purpose-driven work environment, and you have a strong focus on people and on the organization. From what we have touched earlier, was there anything particular, anything that really resonated with you? Do you have there some examples for us?
Yeah, actually very much, Charlotte. Thanks for the great input. I did a couple of notes. I have, I think, 3 examples I could share. So first of all, Charlotte, you were saying like putting culture first can be difficult through change. And I have to admit, you know, we have a kind of culture pulse survey, which we did every 2 years. And in the last reorganization, we always have a lot of change in RB, so we change a lot. And in the last bigger one, we said, actually our culture pulse survey is due, but you know, at the moment, maybe the results will not be so good. So we actually shied away from doing our questionnaire and asking for feedback. So that was actually a good learning. So I don't think I would do that ever again, also after hearing you today, Charlotte. But I think it's also important, therefore, because from what we had, you know, the end, we asked our employees for feedback, and then it took like two to 3 months to get the results. So within an organizational change, it's quite hard then, you know, to map the feedback to actually the line manager who was responsible for that team beforehand. If you are in a restructuring, then the results do not map the organizational change anymore. Therefore, I really think an agile kind of way of asking for feedback is super important, that you have immediate response. It doesn't help you if you have it 2 months later. So that's just also my learning what I had. And it's great to have then platforms which can actually help you. And a second point on that is, you know, if you work in Europe and if you do surveys, always have data privacy in mind. It's just a big one on GDPR. But coming also to a second point, which very much resonated to me, and it was the quote from your CEO. So Betty, so you were mentioning, if you don't deliver on culture in a crisis, then your culture meant nothing to start with. And when you stand successful on the other side, your culture will be why. And that's what I basically feel right now. So the culture, what it says is basically the culture you build on a day-to-day, right? Every day we build culture. Every day we actually create our employee experience. And the culture you build in good times really help you through tough times too. And that's what I experience at the moment. So to give you an example, we have now 3 times a week a calendar invite from our employees. And it's called Varieté, like a little theater. And our employees, you know, single employees, they share their talent. For example, they sing for us, they present their best recipe, like our Mexican colleague just presented her best recipe on guacamole. Then we have really people doing workouts, meditations, breathing exercises for everyone else. So that's something I think we created beforehand, that our employees really impact culture. Everyone has the accountability to form culture. And this was really organized by themselves, and we have it and we love it. So it started in Germany and went through the region, DACH and NORDICS. Other countries have copied it. Our executive team have copied it. So globally, worldwide, there are many of these sessions now, and that is building culture. And that's what I want to say, very much resonated. What you do in good times really help you also going through transformations or difficult times right now. And right now we need to stay connected while still, as you can see, working from home. So for us, that was a big learning, and that's the accountability and the freedom you give to employees to being also able to impact culture.
I believe that this way of speaking up, creating, having the freedom to design things, to come up with new ideas, I think this was certainly a lot of work in the back and in the past, in order to give the employees also the safety and security in order to deliver in such an environment. So congratulations for that. Was there anything else you resonated with? Was there anything a particular topic or something you can personally connect with, touch with?
Yeah, very much. And it was the third point which really resonated to me, I think, the most, which I heard. And you were saying, Charlotte, that many of us can be guilty during times of change of only focusing on the speaking part of communication and wholly neglecting the listening part. And I will give you an example also how I have now learned about this, right? So truly, I believe listening is a key skill of leadership, and I will relate to that a little bit later. But what we had now, so in the times of change, we have also asked, we've done a little survey for our employees as well. And what we found out, for example, is that they thought that we as the leadership team of the region are actually sending more invites to meetings, having longer meetings. So that was actually a perception which employees had, a perception which was there and we weren't aware of, because what we had actually done was we shortened the meetings and we canceled meetings out of our calendar. But listening to our employees so that they had the feeling that we actually did, we could actually react to it, right? We could say what are the facts, and we could also help them in, organizing less meetings, maybe they're on their own and with their colleagues. So these perceptions, I think, is important, and you only find them out, and you are also alluding to this, if you really ask and if you listen. And I think, many of us believe that as a leader, we always need to have the answer. Actually, listening helps a lot. And why do we give feedback? If we now come back to the feedback topic we are speaking about today, so we're giving feedback to our employees so that they can learn, right, and that they develop, and that therefore also they improve their performance and therefore business performance. So super important. That means for us as an organization or as leaders of an organization as well, we need to learn, we need to listen, and we need to develop ourselves and respond to what we hear, right? So this is both ways, I think. And we do feel that we know all about it, and we do feel we need to have the answers, which sometimes maybe we do not need to have, because we need to listen. And we attract and engage and want to retain the best talent, and want to create the best employee experience. So why not ask them how they feel about it, right? So what do they feel? What do they need? What do they think? It's super insightful to have this. And I really believe in the servant leadership approach. So I serve my team. I serve really, or we as leaders, I think we serve the organization. And so as leaders, we need to understand what the organization wants or needs, right? So that we can remove roadblockers for them, that we can enable them, create an environment where people can really develop and achieve things. And that is really what we also gather if we ask and if we listen to create such an environment. And as I said before, the new generation they might learn a bit differently. So we need to listen to them to understand how they want to progress throughout an organization, what they want from us, right?
Thank you so much for the great input. I can only say I agree 1000%. And I also enjoyed very much what you just said, that the leaders, they don't need to know everything, and that we can actually also learn from our employees. And I believe, me personally, that this is the key for the future, that you try to develop collective learnings, that you don't have one person who knows everything, no, but the entire organization needs to identify the way forward. So thank you so much for putting feedback also in this light of leadership and company direction. Coming a little bit to the special circumstances we have now around us, and we just heard recently, especially now in Romania, that it might come a second wave, and that we are not prepared for it, and it seems to be soon again a lockdown, or at least people are getting afraid of it. What were the main challenges for you during the crisis, and how did you react on them? What were the learnings? What were your learnings in that?
So for me personally, it was super hard to not feel the pulse, to not interact with our people. What I normally do, you know, walking through the ads and then really understanding how's the organization feeling like, chatting to people. I'm a relationship builder, so for me this was really something I'm still missing very much, and therefore there was a big urge that, you know, we are having more feedback questionnaires at least to get this full organization feedback and the pulse. And the other big learning is what I shared also before, is that you always need to build culture and always get feedback, because it will just help you through transformations and through crisis. So really listening and communicating, but not just communicating one way. Communication is both ways, and that's what I really have learned now a lot.
Can you give us an example on how you listen to your employees and what actions you have been actually taking?
Yes, one feedback, for example, so we've asked at the very beginning of the lockdown, so we have asked how everyone is feeling, you know, a very, very quick survey. And actually, Charlotte was also mentioning it. They told us, so we asked them very simply, right? So how are we leading them through change, basically? So what could we do more of, what we should be doing less of, what we should continue to do? And they told us they want to see us more. That's also what you had in your question. So they want to see the leadership team more. They want to see a bit of guidance. They want to see us, that we're still present and interact more. And we were like, all right, we are at home, so how do we do that, right? But there are ways you can be more present, right? So we have a monthly meeting with everyone in the organization where we share updates. Why not do that more often, right? Why not always switch on your video in the company meetings we have, you know, commercial meetings, whatever we have. So there are measures you can take, and it was very insightful. It was easy to do, but also we would not have thought that they actually want to see us more, you know. So that was a big, a small example of a big learning.
Thank you so much. One more question. What are some of the key things that you have learned, and what would you recommend leaders or leadership teams to do in times of uncertainty? And I think it's just the beginning. This we will never, or in the near future, we will not see any more circumstances where we can be certain about what's going to happen. So what would you recommend?
Yeah, keep it very short, because I also am a bit conscious of time. So I think what's super important for me, what I've learned, is keep the dialogue constantly. Don't shy away from conducting engagement surveys anyhow. So that's also a big learning I took away. Listen before, during, and after change. And really, you know, we have such sessions like leaders are listening to the organization, so people can come and ask us questions, or we just see how they feel. And then one key takeaway is give everyone the accountability to build culture, always. So once they start, I mean, I speak to all our senior leaders and really enable them and tell them, I am expecting you to build culture and to transform culture, but this is what we really need to do. Not just the senior leaders, everyone has the accountability to build culture, and that's going to help you through transformations.
I totally agree. Where do you go from here? What is next for you? I mean, I guess, okay, you are still working from home, but I guess at some point it will be also for you a return back. So what are the next steps?
Yeah, hopefully opening up the office again. So we have just done a little survey and to understand how our people feel, and because we also have the perception that really there's a big run on the office, but we also wanted to understand how's everyone feeling and how's childcare working out for them, how is it actually possible. So we know that there's not such a big run for the first phase to open up, so we know exactly who's going to return now. So that's going to be one of my next steps. But longer term, obviously, I think I really want to make feedback a habit, and that is one possibility is really to use surveys a lot. But for me, it's also very important that it goes through behaviors, right, and face to face. And that is a challenge we're facing. You want to build a feedback culture, but you need to start from yourself, from the senior leadership team, but then also middle managers and everyone who's there to really ingrain it in the day-to-day behavior, so that also, you know, conducting surveys is very normal, but also having that face-to-face conversation is for me key to really further build and to invest in our leaders on that.
I believe it's also quite, it requires strength, and I think it requires strength to answer these feedbacks in an honest way. And I think if the leadership team is also demonstrating or asking for feedback, I think it's also easier then afterwards in both directions to remember and to be open towards feedback. It's
you need to role model it as senior leaders.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Rike. We will shortly come back to you with some additional questions. I see we already have some.
We have a couple, yeah, I see that too.
We have quite a few in the loop, and I'm sure once we encourage, it will be also getting more. But let me first wrap up a little bit, and then we come to the Q&A, where I'm sure we can have an open discussions touching both scientific and real life examples. So very curious on that. So just to wrap up, the main questions: are we closing the loop and how we communicate for change and uncertainty? Remember, it's not just about speaking, but also about listening to your people and to your organization. Aside from communicating, do we actually know what the employees and what our organization is hearing from us? And do we also accept feedback from the other way around? Have we challenged our reticence to ask for feedback, to ask from the organization about input, ask even for directions? And lastly, also, do we have the possibilities to collect feedbacks face to face? Do we have how to do it in a fast way? Because as Rike also mentioned, sometimes 3 months is already too long, and it's not anymore applicable. So before we jump to the questions, Charlotte, would you like to share with us some insights where we can read, have some additional readings? Where could we have a look at?
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, please do check out our website, so culturefirst/resilience, and on there you can access all of our free templates and resources and other additional guidance around kind of supporting your teams through COVID-19. Our Culture Amp blog and guide also has lots of great articles on the topics and more detail around the surveys that we've covered today. And our People Geek Answers is also a really great place to share ideas and learn from one another within the industry on what each other are doing. So yeah, do check that out, as well as our academy that has lots of great articles to really support you in setting up and running a survey during times of crisis and change.
That's great. Thank you so much. Okay, then let's go into some questions. I see we already have quite a few. Let's start with you, Charlotte. Looking at culture, and what had been the impact on engagement during the COVID-19? Have you seen any engagement going down or up, or what was there, the specifics?
Yeah, so that's actually a really interesting question. And I think, as we kind of mentioned earlier, I think that fear of engagement scores going down is one of the main reasons that organisations have perhaps been kind of reluctant to run surveys during this time. And again, I think I mentioned it earlier, but typically what we do see is that during times of kind of significant change, we do tend to see a drop in engagement scores. But actually, really interestingly, during COVID, we've seen this situation actually bring out the best in a lot of organisations. As we saw with some of that data that I shared, you know, leaders have really been stepping up to the plate during this time. They've really been leading their organisations through crisis. And I think similarly, organisations have just been communicating with employees more than ever before. And additionally, I think where employees have made that move to remote working, there's been such a big emphasis on staying connected, well-being, that actually this is having what we're kind of coining like a COVID halo effect, where actually this situation is going to have more of a long-term impact on engagement. Certainly some of the customers that I've been working with and some of the kind of the result sessions that we've been doing, they've seen really big kind of upticks in some of their kind of engagement data, and specifically questions around leadership and communication. So we are actually doing at Culture Amp some kind of more digging into this data. So hopefully we'll have some more kind of firm analysis around that. But anecdotally, actually, we have seen that engagement for a lot of organisations has improved, or there'll certainly be a knock-on effect to when they run their next engagement survey, say kind of Q3, Q4, where the way that employees have felt treated kind of during this time is really going to have a long-term impact on their kind of subsequent engagement scores as well. So that's been really nice to see.
Thank you so much. I see a question which I was almost about to ask earlier. Rike, especially in Eastern Europe, we are facing quite a high power distance usually between the leadership teams and the employees, and we feel a certain. It happens that employees are afraid of giving honest feedback. How do you overcome these obstacles in not giving honest feedback or trying to say what you believe the boss wants to hear?
Yeah, that's a difficult one for sure, and not that easy to change from one day to another, I think. So it starts very early, right? It starts about how do you form the culture and values of an organization, and then also how much do you invest in your leaders? Because I think your leaders need to role model it, and they need to really honestly ask for feedback and really be able and to keep or to get feedback as well. And I think sometimes we mix up feedback with criticism. Feedback is not positive, it's not negative. Feedback is feedback, right? So it's not a criticism itself. So you need to stand. You need to have the strength to also get some feedback to be able to learn. I think what would help here, if organizations are too afraid to ask for feedback yet, it might be that the organization is not ready, but then really invest in kind of a coaching approach. So leadership, you know, you can have a directing leadership approach, but you could also start coaching, and coaching is all about asking good questions and listening. So if you coach your employees, you will enable them also to come up with answers and ideas themselves, and you enable, or you open up the door a bit for them also to, you know, to give suggestions and to be listened to, so that they get a bit of that feel for it before you then start really with having feedback surveys within the organization. But then the surveys are also anonymous, so you can answer also without any names. So most of the surveys have then only a certain kind of people who need to answer, so that you do not directly link back. But the organization needs to be ready for it, and you need to prepare the organization. So it's there probably that the management team or the lead team, they need to start working on their leadership abilities, or a different kind of leadership style first. That would be like my first kind of thoughts on this.
Yeah, this is absolutely key, and we also supported many companies, especially in transforming from. We have here some heavy examples when you want to transform former state-owned companies, for example. It is really difficult to change the mentality and to create such an environment. But I think, as you mentioned, this is a very long-term road you have to take. But I think it's a necessity, and you cannot avoid it.
And be transparent about what you want to do, right? So people understand.
Absolutely.
There were a couple of more questions in the chat.
So we have.
So that one has been answered.
I have to put. Okay, there has been one more for this one is already answered. In terms of how often should you answer feedbacks and surveys? How long should we wait before gathering? So we don't want our employees to get survey fatigue. How long should we wait before gathering more feedback? Charlotte, maybe that's a good one for you.
Yeah, and that's actually a question that we get a lot from our customers. I think that kind of notion of survey fatigue is something that's kind of really important to a lot of our kind of customers. But I think our general kind of advice around that, it's really dependent on how quickly you're able to take action. So at Culture Amp, we very much talk about employees getting kind of lack of action fatigue rather than survey fatigue. And what that means is that essentially employees will be willing to keep completing surveys and giving their feedback if they understand, firstly, where that feedback is going, that they feel that they've actually been listened to and that they've seen some kind of tangible action as a result. So I think as a rule, kind of during COVID, I guess the kind of the action planning has felt quite different. I think with when we're talking about kind of engagement surveys, the actions from that can feel quite kind of large scale, very strategic, perhaps more kind of long term. Whereas a lot of the actions that we've seen kind of during COVID, where the situation is kind of continuously evolving, kind of day to day, week to week, organisations are kind of action planning a lot quicker, and it's been more about kind of pivoting their response. So you know, understanding what's worked well, adapting it, changing it, and then kind of surveying employees again. So actually through COVID, we've seen a lot of our customers kind of more at the start of lockdown do even kind of weekly pulses. So to kind of continuously check in, as I said, kind of take some action or pivot the response and then understand how well that had kind of landed. So I think as a rule, we advise against kind of surveying unless employees have seen some kind of action from the previous one. So that's a kind of a broad rule to use. But as I said, it's really about the kind of the action piece that's really important rather than the number of surveys that you're doing.
Absolutely. There's a question, interesting from Madalena. We have seen that the HR managers are becoming more and more drivers of change. What would you advise HR managers to do during times of change? So basically,
not an easy one. I think as HR, the role is kind of also developing over time, right? So we are basically also change managers now, and we all need to go through some kind of qualification, I think, or read a lot around change management and what does it make. So how do employees feel, right? So what is a change curve? How do you bring or accompany employees through a change curve? I think that is very important. And then the second one is we are change agents, but we are also coaches. So it's important that we work with the leadership team, so with the top leadership team, but also with the lead teams below to really help them to communicate, give clarity, give transparency, and drive change. So it is not just, you know, telling or working with the employees, it's working a lot with the leadership teams, and then, you know, everyone builds the change and everyone helps you to transform an organization through change. So it's not just the lead team, it's not just the one HR person. You need to have more change agents and you need to coach and work with your lead teams and managers.
Change agents is a good point. There's one question from Alex. He mentioned office work will soon resume, and he was mentioning that we might come back to bad culture habits. If positive, how to address in due time these risks. So basically, how would you mitigate coming back to the old habits and not reacting to the learnings you had during the change? Do you see the risks in falling back, or would you continue?
Not sure. I'm super understand. Maybe we can also unmute Alex so he can share his question. So I think, you know, to drive change and to drive leadership capacity, is continuously, we work continuously on it. So we continuously need to work and adapt to new circumstances, and then still see what kind of leadership style do I need to not fall back into other habits, right? I'm not sure if I really 100% got the question, but maybe there's a possibility for Alex to explain it a bit to me or to us.
Yeah, we'll get to that a bit later. Charlotte, which are the top competencies a leader should possess in order to succeed in an agile organization? Do you have there maybe some answers for this question?
Yeah, sure. So a great question. I think what, for me, like the pandemic has shown in particular, is that leaders really need to be compassionate, and I think again kind of start to utilize some of those more kind of historic softer skills. So I've worked with lots of customers again over the last couple of months in particular, and the ones that have done really well and that have been kind of a lot more successful in this are the ones where leaders have been very open, very honest, and really communicated with employees in a more kind of personable and kind of human way. I think when leaders can kind of recognize that this is an anxious time, it's a scary time for many, I think that leading with compassion is actually really critical during this time. Again, we saw in some of that data that I shared, like just how important it is for leaders to be open and honest and visible and provide stability to their employees. So I absolutely think those are some of the core competencies, but I think particularly now that kind of compassionate and kind of human element really kind of needs to come through. And from what we've seen in kind of the data and a lot of the kind of the results sessions that I've been doing with our customers is the leaders that have kind of perhaps pivoted to that more kind of compassionate and personable approach are the ones that are really kind of succeeding, and I think going to come out the other side of this in a much kind of better place.
Absolutely. There's quite an interesting question from Silvia Popper. I would address it because it's not addressed. I will give it to you, Rike, because you have quite a lot of coaching expertise. We mentioned that HR is also there to support the leadership capabilities of the leadership team. And Silvia was asking, what about fear, responsibility for keeping the profitability of the company? Do you have any tips and tricks for the leadership teams on how to overcome own fears in order to be confident in front of the leadership, in front of the employees? Do you have there some insights out of pocket?
Yeah, so very good question, I think. So fear is definitely something everyone has, right? It's very natural. I do not have an answer to that because it really is depending on the individuals and how you cope with it. But I think what is very powerful is the power of vulnerability, right? If you share what kind of fear you have and maybe address it not to everyone in the organization first, but there are for sure others who feel the same, and you can find together solutions, and maybe someone has already experienced it in a different way. So I think it's very natural to have fear, and it's very important to address it and not hide away, because then you do probably make mistakes, or you are not your full self, and you're not a good leader if you are distracted by something. So it's important to address it. But I do not have like the one answer now, because it's for me very hard to understand the real current situation on that.
Thank you. This message was again very impactful. So I believe the power of vulnerability. I think this is something which many leaders and managers are fearing, just to give in and say, I have no idea, I don't know. So I think showing this vulnerability is already resolving quite a lot in the purpose and in the whole things, and it also engages again collective thinking and trying to engage people also to think for the company direction and not only with internal. So thank you very much for that input. Here we have another questions for you, Charlotte. I was seeing it. Should we be gathering feedbacks from employees who were on furlough? That means who were laid off or in on short-term labor. I think it's a very sensitive questions to ask those people for feedback on how you did as an organization.
Yeah, absolutely. We've had a lot of questions around this. I think, again, particularly in the first kind of few weeks of lockdown, where a lot of companies are having to make the decision to furlough people, we were getting a lot of requests in terms of how should we manage this? What should we do? Can we survey them? I think, broadly our advice is, consult with your own kind of internal legal teams on that. I know as well, kind of country to country, the rules will kind of vary. From a kind of UK perspective, a lot of the customers that we've kind of worked with that have decided to pursue kind of surveying furloughed employees have kind of asked employees to opt in and to being contacted via their personal email, because I know there's rules and regulations around kind of work emails being used. So that's kind of the first point. So kind of checking in with how best to kind of contact them and whether that's appropriate. And then it's just about being kind of mindful about the questions that you are going to ask your kind of furloughed population. It's a very kind of stressful and anxiety inducing kind of time for them as well. I think it's really great that a lot of companies do want to kind of check in on how they're still feeling. And actually one example that kind of sticks in my mind is a customer that we work with over here in the UK, and they did a separate kind of furlough survey on their staff because they wanted to make sure that they were still feeling connected to their teams, and they were providing them with lots of kind of learning and development materials to really help prepare them and set them up for when they do eventually return to the office. So there's really kind of great examples of how it can work, but I think it's just about being really mindful of the questions that we are asking that population, and it would probably need to feel like quite a different survey to what we're going out to with kind of our full-time staff. But absolutely consult with any kind of, I think, like on the ground legal teams on best ways of communicating with them and actually getting in touch.
I found in the chat box another question from Laura. It was actually quite complimentary. Whom would you prioritize in asking feedback from? She mentioned top management, middle management, direct manager, or the entire organization. Do you have there, how would you prioritize, or whom would you address, ask for feedback?
I'm happy to take that one. I think for me, the answer would be everyone. I think it's really valuable to understand how every kind of level of the organisation is feeling. As I mentioned earlier, leaders can often have quite a different view or picture of what's going on to what perhaps, more frontline staff are experiencing. And often when we do look at kind of feedback data by those different demographic cuts, whether that's in kind of heat maps or by different kind of slices and dices of the data, we do start to see really kind of big differences with how the experience is being kind of lived by those different kind of parts of the organisation. And I'd say that's been even more true during kind of the COVID situation. Managers are under lots of different stresses trying to manage their teams remotely and maintain well-being and not get burnt out. Teams are trying to stay connected with one another and manage workloads remotely. So I think it's absolutely valuable to get feedback from right across the organisation. I certainly wouldn't limit it to just kind of managers or leaders, but really understand the experiences that kind of each of those groups are having.
Absolutely, great. Okay, I think we are...
There's one more question from Werner, which I would like to take.
Yeah, please.
Hello. Obviously, so he was asking, the direction of the future world of work. So that's a big topic at the moment, and how do we find out the right way? And I think it's there's obviously no answer to that yet, but there's a very, very good discussions, and I think it's a very exciting topic because this current time is really changing, and it's probably also changing how we work in the future in the long term. And there are good thoughts about, so what's the most important at the moment? And that's also what I feel in my organization at the moment. How do you stay connected, and how do you build that connection? Because at the moment, we thrive because our people have built great relationships, and that is helping us now to also in this time of remote working. But now we have, the first new joiners coming in, and they feel a bit different, right? So they do not have that chance to build these relationships. So I think in the future, if we think of like working only remotely, we would miss that part, we would miss the base of the relationship pyramid, right? So you only can get great results if you have great relationships in an organization, right? There's this kind of a relationship pyramid. So maybe the future world is something about, the office is more like a connecting hub. The office is more something where you build relationships, but the work is maybe not really done in an office daily. The work is maybe done somewhere else, but it's important that we have connections, from my point of view, in the office. But how is this going to be? I don't know. I'm sure everyone has great ideas on that, and we will now work on the future. It's super exciting. So thanks for the question. It goes a little bit hand in hand also with what Alex has asked on, the increasing role of non-verbal communication and collecting feedback during remote coaching. So what kind of skills does it have do we need if we are not in touch anymore, right? And we all know that within communication, only words make 7% of the communication. The rest is basically your body language and the tonality. So that's also something I think we need to go a lot deeper into if we think of future world of work. So how do we really communicate in a proper way with people if we are not seeing them that often maybe anymore, right? So we all need to upskill ourselves in communication. And I think the video calls, as we also have today, will help us a lot. But there's probably a lot around learning and coaching what we are still not aware of yet, what we still need to learn. So it's a very good question. It's very good to really think this through for the future. It's not our topic today, but it will be an interesting topic to come.
This is absolutely true. Yes, Charlotte, how about putting surveys, feedbacks, and so the surveys and the feedback you collected from organizations, how do you put it into actions? How do you derive actions? How do you follow up actions? Because I think a lot of companies are actually gathering feedback, but it's very much also on how to put it into reality, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for us, really collecting feedback is just kind of the first part. So I think I mentioned it right up front, but at Culture Amp, we talk about the importance of collecting, understanding, and most importantly, acting on employee feedback. So I think kind of at a very kind of basic level, organizations should absolutely be, sharing results with employees, even if that, in the first instance is just very high level. I think kind of the amount of data that you share and the kind of the level of detail and reports that you share will really kind of depend, I guess, on the maturity of your feedback culture. But I think it's really important that any actions that are taken are communicated to employees. And I think critically that any actions are linked back to the survey as well. I think often employees don't always connect something's happened over here, and that's because this feedback happened over here. So it's really about kind of connecting the dots and ensuring that any actions that are taken are always kind of linked back to the survey, because that not only does that help build kind of further credibility and belief that feedback is being listened to and acted upon, but then, when the next survey comes around, employees will be a lot more willing to kind of give their feedback because they've seen direct action take place from previously. So yeah, the action planning part is really important, and kind of within a platform such as Culture Amp, we have kind of analytics within the tool that can help you really identify the key questions that you want to be kind of taking action on, so that you can start to really kind of focus your efforts in the right area.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. I will have to cut here at least the official part. That means I would stop now the video because whoever wants to remain, I would invite them basically to the panelists, to the open discussions. We have only 10 minutes left, so for those who would still like to remain and to discuss, so I will cut now the video recording, and who wants to remain in the discussion, you're more than welcome to join in the kind of open discussions for the next 10-12 minutes. Thank you everybody so much for being with us and for attending with us. And yeah, I hope it was insightful. Hope this can give some directions on how the leaders can use feedback in the future. And yes, hope to see you soon again. So, and I could now stop the recording.